as we all know that today we have Shardul Dabir sir as a speaker. Shardul is a very dynamic personality with a vast experience. Over the past 8 years, he has through the fields of engineering, applied sciences, research and development, entrepreneurship, management, and highly complementary liberal arts. At GFI India, Shardul works as an innovation specialist to accelerate the early stage innovation ecosystem for the smart protein. So today's webinar is based on rise of alternative protein, the future of protein. So, Shardul, let's start off with an introduction. As we all know that you are innovation specialist at GFI India. So, I'm sure everyone here will be very curious to know about your career path. So, we want to know about your journey at GFI India, and also we want to know the work that GFI India does.
Begin to the session. Thank you so much for that initial question, right? About what my career path has been, what do I currently do, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. So, a very warm welcome to all the audience today. Today's topic of discussion is rise of alternative proteins, the future of protein. We want to talk about what alternative proteins really are. Some of you might have heard this term before. And I'm an innovation specialist at an Indian nonprofit called the Good Food Institute, India. And today's hosts obviously are the wonderful team at Food Techno Ace. So thank you again, Pragya, for your question about a little bit about myself, right? I'm a food technologist and a food techno manager, like a lot of people in the audience today. I've taken my education in food technology and management. I did a bunch of research in novel areas of food processing, including high pressure processing, high moisture extrusion, cold atmospheric plasma processing, a bunch of other technologies when I was in the US at Rutgers University, at University of Saskatchewan. And I was thinking when I was graduating, what kind of a career path I want to go ahead with. Whether it's going to be production or quality in the food industry, relatively mature food industry, food production, food manufacturing industry of India, whether it's going to be, a management degree for higher education, whether it's going to be MTech, whether it's going to be a master's program. And out of all of those career paths, I ended up doing a little bit of liberal arts to understand a lot of other contexts which are complementary to food science and technology, right? Right, sociology, like anthropology, or like a bunch of other subjects like economics. You have to understand the entire society before you're trying to solve for problems of food, because problems of food are so diversified, right? It starts at farm, ends up on your plate. There are so many stakeholders dependent on agriculture, dependent on the food industry in our country. There's environment, all of these resources, land, water being used in the production of food. So I was thinking about all of these things and food systems as well. So what I decided to do was join this nonprofit called the Good Food Institute. And our aim is to solve for this key question. By 2050, we are going to be 10 billion people, right? Almost 10 billion people. And what we need to do is essentially bridge the gap between 2006 and 2050, where we need to produce more than 70% protein, more than 70% more calories, and we have to feed so many more mouths compared to now. And to do that, we'll need a lot more resources, right? Because to make meat, eggs, and dairy, which are high protein foods, which people want to eat, you need a lot of land, a lot of water, and we'll see some of that in the next slide. So that's the key question we are really trying to answer, right? And we have to understand, as a food technologist who thinks about, production of food, conversion of food into different things, and then consumption of food. You have to understand the current food system, especially the animal agriculture system, which we are using to get our meat, eggs, and dairy. It's kind of really broken, right? We haven't really, we haven't really produced so much food, and we need so much meat, eggs, and dairy in the next 45 years as much as we've needed for the past 10,000 years. That's a huge increase. We always discuss that, food thrown away in our value chain is like 30% of the 100%, as you can see in the first two kind of bars. So we keep focusing on this, right? Food thrown away. And we keep talking about how we can, perhaps make incremental changes to make our food system better. But we are not talking about the actual losses in the food production itself because of the modes of production we are using. So currently we're talking about animals, right, as a mode of production of protein for us, whether it's milk, eggs, or dairy, and also meat as well, seafood as well. All of these products, only medium for us to produce it is animals, because they are the ones who feed on crops and then produce it. But the problem there is that exact inherent inefficiency, right? Because 10 calories go in, 1 calorie comes out in case of a pig, 9 calories go in, 1 calorie comes out in case of a chicken, 8 calories comes out, becomes 1 calorie of food when it's larger fishes. And for example, for beef or for cows, it's 100 is to 1. 100 calories go in, 1 calorie comes out. So the efficiency is really bad. And this has been achieved after a lot of decades, right? We have optimized these animals. We feed them already a lot of antibiotics. And we are trying our best to, essentially optimize this whole value chain so that we can get more protein per calorie out of it. But ultimately, the problem is these are, living entities, and they're going to breathe. They're going to have a lot of offals, which we don't use, parts of their body which are going to be thrown away. They're going to release a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So, for example, chicken emits 40 times more carbon dioxide per calorie of protein compared to lentils, which is a pretty significant fact, which is why we will look at why plant-based proteins made from lentils, chickpeas, pulses is much more better for the environment in terms of sustainability, in terms of water use, land use, carbon emissions, all of that. And we have to understand the current system is broken in many ways, in terms of sustainability, in terms of efficiency, and also in terms of safety. We are currently living amidst the pandemic, right? It's a zoonotic pandemic, like some of us know. Increasingly, a lot of these things are going to be common in the next 20 years. This is a virus, but we all know as food technologists that bacteria are way more common in the nature. And once bacteria like superbugs, they become resistant to antibiotics, modern medicine, then the real kind of problem begins in terms of the number of deaths we'll have from antibiotic resistant bacteria in the next 20 years. We're already seeing a lot of this, right, in many parts of the world, and we'll talk about it a little bit. And we also talked about the efficiency, and the fact is we use 75% of our agricultural land for raising and feeding livestock, which only provides 1/3 of our global protein supply. So as you can see, at one hand, we have so many hungry people and malnutrited people. At the same time, we are growing so much food, but we are not feeding them, but we are feeding it to animals to get the end product, right? And then there's obviously, like, if you think about the entire transportation sector, right? Some of you might be from metro cities, Mumbai, Delhi, hating your traffic. If you combine all of that, if you combine all the transportation, railways, flights all over the world, still more than that, industrial animal agriculture kind of is responsible for greenhouse gases, which is almost 15 to 18%. So it's one of the top 2 or 3, environmental concerns right now, in terms of air pollution, in terms of water use, loss of coral and seafood biodiversity, loss of species, a bunch of other stuff, rainforests being decimated, being kind of taken down in Amazon and Philippines and bunch of parts of India to essentially make place for grazing, and also use again the land kind of for livestock and growing of livestock as well. So these are pretty drastic problems. And again, like I said, swine flu populations, millions of pig recently were decimated in China, right? Millions of chicken are decimated every time a pandemic or a bird flu or something like that hits, or a swine flu hits in case of pigs in different parts of the world. And then what happens is the farmers dependent on it, all the stakeholders, entrepreneurs dependent on just that one animal husbandry or livestock has no other income source, right? And essentially this is a great opportunity to also diversify that. And at the same time, basically, farmers are losing a lot of income because of kind of pandemic complications as well. People are more concerned about where their food is coming from, etc., etc. So all of these zoonotic diseases, antibiotic resistant bacteria is going to be harmful for animals, and the large amount of animals that we essentially slaughter and process every year. We do almost 70 to 100 billion land animals, and probably billions and billions tons of seafood catch as well, a lot of which is again wasted during the catch process. So given all of this, now I think people should know, okay, great. If people know all of this, the meat consumption, dairy consumption, egg consumptions won't go up, right? We are a vegetarian country anyways. We are not. I mean, that's just a clarification we'll have later on. But the thing is, none of these things are new revelations, right? Public policy stakeholders, experts, Ivy League researchers, bunch of places, UN, FAO, everybody's been saying this for years. But nobody listens and nobody cares, because people love eating meat and eggs and dairy because it's yummy, right? And people crave that. And that's why the meat demand is going to go up by 70% by 2050, right? And as you can see here, Asia is going to be huge increase in it over the next few years as well. And as you can see, Asia has been steadily increasing, primarily due to China, but largely the next 20 years, the change will also come from India. As you can see here, for the past 30 years, the demand of poultry has been the most in India, China, and parts of Southeast Asia. And for the next 20 years till 2050, the most amount of demand of poultry meat is also going to come from India as well. And then again, goat meat, etc., because those are the meats we consume most. So yeah, that's a little bit about my introduction and what the Good Food Institute as a non-profit does. We build this sector, Pragya, basically as a non-profit. We work on policy, we work with government stakeholders, we work with a bunch of other players to build this sector out from the ground in different parts of the world.
Okay, that was really good to hear about your journey, Shardul. So, my next question to you is I'm continuously hearing alternative proteins. So, I just want to know what exactly are these alternative proteins? And yes, of course, this sector is growing exponentially. So, I'm really curious to know about the key drivers, which are the reason behind the increasing popularity of alternative proteins in India and globally as well.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. So our theory of change is pretty simple, right? At the Good Food Institute, it's make something people want, and it's borrowed from Y Combinator, which is a very famous kind of incubation acceleration kind of an organization in the US. So make something people want. You have to understand this is sounds pretty simple, but essentially what that means is you have to give smart proteins or alternative proteins, and we'll discuss what is the difference between the two later on. But basically, there are three ways of making alternative proteins as GFI defines it, right? Plant-based proteins, fermentation-derived proteins, and cultivated meat, eggs and dairy, or cellular agriculture, or cultivated proteins as well. So these are the three key modalities when it comes to production, the cost, the technology, and the infrastructure. They're all quite different. As some of you are food technologists, you must have started thinking, okay, yeah, this fits well for a lot of food technologists. This perhaps fit well for biotechnologists, tissue engineers, biomedical engineers, etc., etc. This might be relevant for a lot of people from microbiology, zoology, also food science and technology. But the good thing is food technologists find application in all three of them, and we'll see that a little later on. So these are the three key modalities. Here, the base is plant-based proteins, like we discussed. Here, it is animal cell culture. You're basically taking cells out of animals and then, growing fats, muscles, a bunch of other stuff like dairy proteins, casein protein, etc., etc. A bunch of stuff that is usually found only in animal proteins. And then what you are essentially also trying to do is find microbes, which we know are plenty. A lot of bacteria, a lot of fungi, a lot of different kind of and algae is also covered in plant-based proteins, by the way. So we derive a lot of fermentation-based ingredients, which are recombinant proteins or fermentation-based proteins from this third method, which all go into the category of alternative proteins. So these are the three key verticals you need to know about, right? And plant-based meats, just zeroing down on one category, each are essentially produced directly from plants or crops like pea protein, chickpeas, coconut oils, etc. And what we are trying to do, like think about this, right? As a food technologist, you know that meat is just a bunch of chemicals, like it's basically carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, fats, some minerals, and water, right? Put together by nature. We know that because we know the composition of meat. Now, what we need to do is essentially find those same fats, proteins, minerals, water, etc. in plants, right? Plants which are great in its protein source. Indians know this from a long time ago. We consume a lot of dals, pulses, lentils, millets, which are high in protein, right? We have historically consumed those. In the last 70 years, we've been just settling for a lot of monocrop things like rice and wheat and corn and soy. But there are a lot of indigenous ingredients, right, from which we can make this. The good thing is you can also add complex carbohydrates, fibers, etc., so that the products are less unhealthy compared to meat, which we know in some ways could have cholesterol, a bunch of other things, which could be unhealthy for us. So plant-based Beyond Burger is an example of plant-based meat. It's made from yellow pea protein. It uses 89% less, it releases 89% less greenhouse gases and 99% less water. It's one of the pioneers of plant-based meat. It's been working for the past 12 years, since 2009-10, and they are one of the public companies. So if you Google Beyond Meat, you'll see that they're trading as $BYND on on New York Stock Exchanges and Nasdaq as well. So very successful IPO. Recently, Oatly, which is a plant-based dairy company, also went public, but we'll see that about a little later. So the second example is plant-based eggs, which is Just Egg. Again, 98% less water, 83% less land, 93% less CO2, and 100 million eggs were sold from plant-based egg in March 2020. That's a huge number. And what we are essentially trying to understand is also plant-based dairy, which is made from pea protein, coconut, almond, tapioca, a bunch of other nuts, a bunch of other crops. So you can use all of this. I know cauliflower-based cheese companies as well. which are doing extremely well, and their products taste exactly like cheese in many, many ways. And a lot of functional properties like the melting point, the stretchability, etc., are also kind of accounted for while you do all of this research on the crops that goes into making a specific product in the new product development cycle. So very exciting times for being a food technologist. And then there's also cultivated meat, right? This is basically genuine animal meat. So what we're doing is taking a cell out of an animal. It could be sheep, goat, it could be any animal, right? Cow, it could be anything. Pig, seafood, tuna fish, it could be crustaceans. And what we're trying to do is grow those exact cells and replicate them so that they immortalize, co-culture, and basically aggregate on a scaffold in a bioreactor by giving it growth factors, nutrient broth, all of that. And at the end, it looks like a beer fermentation company, right? It's basically meat brewing company, because there are these large fermentation tanks in which you're essentially putting in the cells, and bioreactors in which all of this mass is growing into three-dimensional structures and a bunch of other things which you cannot achieve through perhaps plant-based meat kind of technology currently, which is extrusion, right? So again, these are real meats. So if I have a shellfish allergy, I would have a cultivated meat shellfish allergy, because it's actual living cells, right? So that's the difference between plant-based and cultivated. There are many, many companies. I used to say till 2019, I joined GFI in 2018, right? For the past 3 years, I've seen this ecosystem grow a lot by dozens of companies, the cultivated meat space. But in December 2020, something unreal happened when the Singapore government actually approved these products very soon than we thought for consumer sale. Now you can just order it on your phone, like you order on Zomato or Swiggy, and get it delivered to your apartment in Singapore, and actually consume cultivated chicken, which is actual chicken. So very interesting thing. It was from Eat Just, the same company which is making plant-based eggs. So that was a historic moment. And then fermentation, like we discussed, is already a very established thing. We all know, we all have studied fermentation, but this is slightly more advanced in the sense that you need to figure out which microbes, species would actually make the whole cell biomass, or a valuable fraction thereof, maybe a specific protein ingredient or a functional protein bit. Like, for example, there are three key ways in which we can divide fermentation: traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, and precision fermentation. And as you can start thinking, biomass fermentation is more like the whole mass is fermented as a protein base, which you use to make different kind of meat textures out of it. Kind of mixing them, shearing them, etc. later on. And Quorn is a very famous company there. It's kind of like fungi protein. And then, traditional fermentation we use for dairy. We can also use for plant-based dairy to make plant-based cheese, plant-based yogurt, a bunch of other stuff. And then there's also precision fermentation to get growth factors, enzymes, flavors, pigments, all of these vitamins and, amino acids that we need to add to this, plant-based foods or fermentation-derived foods, so that they're more wholesome, more bioavailable, more healthy, more complete, etc., etc. And then these are some examples of, fermentation based meats. They look pretty real. I'm sure you can Google all of this in your own time. Very exciting kind of meat like textures from the fermentation bits as well. You can see some of these products like egg white proteins, milk proteins like casein and whey, collagen proteins, heme proteins, growth factors are all being currently produced by alternative protein companies, for the plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat, eggs and dairy sector. So pretty interesting three key modalities, right, Pragya? And yeah, with that, I think we can come to this question.
Yes. So, well, now I'm pretty much clear with alternative proteins. The next question which arises in my mind is, what is smart protein sector? Is it same as alternative protein sector? Like, I want to know some basic similarities or differences that are there between smart protein sector and alternative protein sector. And what is the reason behind this sector that we are actually calling it as a smart protein sector?
Yeah, no, absolutely a great question. Some people have this confusion whether it's all protein or smart protein. You have to understand, fundamentally, both of these things are same, right? And we are using smart protein in the Indian context. So we call the alternative protein sector, which is as is called globally, as smart protein sector in India. And smart proteins are alternative proteins. And the question is, why is the smart protein? Like, why does it even exist, right? Not just what. So you have to know, like all the things that I already said, you can perhaps make a little bit of smart sense that all of the reasons that we talked about, the zoonotic diseases, climate change, food insecurity issues, public health risks, including for both producers, all the stakeholders across the value chain, when they're involved in an animal agriculture kind of a factory farming kind of a format as well. At the same time, malnutrition is pretty rampant in our country. We need to think about that. We need to think about all of our diverse set of indigenous crops that, India has so many biodiverse zones. We are the largest producer of a lot of these crops. So for example, India is one of the largest producers of moonbean, which is, the product you saw, which is the protein concentrate isolate base, which Eat Just uses in their plant-based eggs. And they currently sold 100 millionth egg equivalent, right? So that's a huge amount and a huge business potential for Indian entrepreneurs to figure out this chickpea, pea protein isolates, a bunch of other yellow peas, and lentils and millets. And you can also think about making proteins out of it as a B2B export opportunity for this huge growing market across the world. And at the same time, 1/6 of people in 2050, like we discussed initially, are going to be Indian, and half of them are going to be Asian. So there are going to be a lot of mouths to feed, and these people want to eat meat, eggs, and dairy because now they can afford it, right? And there's a strong correlation between income. As the country becomes more developed, more people start eating these products because these are aspirational foods. And that's why we have plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat, eggs, and dairy and seafood, which are essentially the kind of alternative protein technology, which is a very scalable exponential technology. What you want to do is replicate taste, price, and convenience. So taste the same or better, cost the same or less, and be as accessible and conveniently available just as conventional meat, eggs, and dairy products are. If you solve for these three key things: price, taste, and convenience. Taste in the sense you have to replicate all the organoleptic properties, all the, perhaps sensory properties, the gastronomic experience. We'll see some of this little later. And that's why this sector has so much positive externalities on so many different issues, right? Environment, animals, health, land use, water use, and essentially profits, money. So that's why protein has been made smart, and that's why we are calling it the smart protein sector, to build a more healthy, sustainable, and a just protein supply for, the 21st century. And that's what we do at GFI India. Like I was telling you, we work with science and technology specialists, we work with corporate engagement specialists, we have our policy experts, our government relations experts. We have a bunch of people who understand all of these things at depth. They are working with a lot of stakeholders, investors, entrepreneurs, corporations, CSIR, DBT, DST, a bunch of educational bodies, NIFTIM, IITs, NITs, etc., etc. And what we are trying to do is essentially build this alternative protein ecosystem globally in many different countries by bridging in the gap and basically getting the best practices from all over the world into India as well. So we work with a lot of international affiliates in a lot of different countries, and we primarily work out of GFI India, which is a very India-specific non-profit, which focuses on India-specific food systems context as well, while solving for the larger, protein issue.
Okay, great. So now I am very much clear about the difference between two sector. The next question to you is, Shardul, that what is the change that has happened in last 10 years in smart protein sector? And yes, of course, what else we are expecting to see in the coming 10 years in this sector?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's pretty futuristic already, right? The smart protein sector. Like we saw the kind of transforming of meat, eggs, and dairy. Think about it. We haven't done this for thousands of years, right? We know of meat, eggs, and dairy only through animals. And this was a great innovation in the area of food science and technology, in the sense that it has given an alternative, a much sustainable, healthier, efficient alternative to a lot of people who had no other alternative, right? So the thing we discussed about people not caring about these things enough, and that's because people love the taste of meat, eggs, and dairy, and the gastronomic experience of eating meat, eggs, and dairy. And I'm sure a lot of non-vegetarians in our audience who are the target core consumer for these products, right? Not vegans or vegetarians. We'll see that later on as well, which is very important. From all that I said, you have to understand who the target consumer for this is, right? And all the big companies, you're seeing some names on the screen. I left it for you to kind of absorb a little bit from. In 2021, almost 1,100 companies are there in this sector. Largest meat companies in the world, whether it's Tyson, JBS, Cargill, are all Hormel, are all involved in this sector, right? And they have invested in some startups. They understand that this is where the future of protein is going towards, and a lot of big companies like Nestle, Pepsi, Starbucks, Kraft, HUL, Unilever, all kind of involved in this sector very, very heavily. If you all Google on their websites, you'll see a lot of plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy offerings from a lot of them. And like I said, 1,100 companies, right? So when I started in 2018, this is a map made by our friends at newprotein.org, Olivia Fox Caban. I love showing this this map, because it just shows the immense number of companies that are kind of being started globally in different segments and different parts of the value chain of, alternative protein or the smart protein industry. So it's very, very interesting to see so much innovation happening. And 3 years ago, when I started working at GFI India as a very relatively early stage food technologist, food techno manager kind of a professional, I only used to see like 15, 20 names on this map. So it has been exponentially growing, like you rightly said. This is for dairy. You can see, different nuts, barley, banana, amaranth, algae, almond, bunch of other things which are, and again, within ingredients, you have to think, right? What ingredients make sense for you? Like, for example, within nuts, almond is a very high use of water it takes to grow almonds, So though almond dairy or almond milk is relatively sustainable than conventional dairy by a huge margin, within plant-based protein there are many other ingredients which could be even more sustainable, hardy, better for your soil, etc., etc., and local to your country and your context, right? Local to your state and your context, because you have to establish value chains, and that's what you have to think while choosing of ingredients during new product development. The market is going to be huge. That's where we are going, Pragya, in the future, right? By 2035, and not just GFI, everybody like Markets and Markets, BCGs, McKinsey's, JP Morgans of the world, Barclays, AT Kearney's, all of these large think tanks, market consulting groups are also saying that the market size is going to be anywhere between 100 to 370 billion dollars by 2035, which is a huge number, right? And this increase is going to happen primarily in fermentation and cultivated as well. And why this is happening, this is not just theoretical studies. We've actually seen hard investment in the past 20 in the past year, which is 2020, which was a breakthrough year for alternative proteins, honestly, Pragya. Like, so much investment went into it, so many companies were started, 200 new VCs, billions of dollars being invested, which is a huge amount of increase over 2019. Across the three verticals, you'll see there's a lot of investment interest as well. So this is kind of the future. It's not a trend anymore. It's a transformation which is bound to happen, and it's up to us as stakeholders of the food industry who thinking about future of food, thinking about food industry in India, thinking about India's place in the food processing map of the world, on what we can do in terms of building these sectors out, which are pretty futuristic in our own country. Like some of you might be seeing a lot of these graphs. This is not a COVID cases graph, though it's kind of falling now, but this is also investments graph, right, for the alternative protein sector. Like I said, it's a breakthrough year. Many investments year on year are increasing. In 2021 you're going to see this graph somewhere here. So it's going to be super interesting in terms of how the growth kind of takes place over the next few years.
Okay, I must say, Shardul, that along with alternative protein sector, smart protein sector is also on a great high. So now I just want to know, like, can you just give us a market overview, like where the protein sector currently stand? And of course, who all are attending this webinar, we all are pretty much curious to know about the wide space opportunities that are available in protein sector in India.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And just to clarify again, not two different sectors, just named differently, because these proteins are smart, and like in India, we have a lot of connotations related to smart protein, right? Smart cities, bunch of other smart programs. So it just fits well. We have a mission for smart protein, which we'll see later. We have the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. We have the Smart Protein Summit, which is our largest conference for stakeholders in this industry. So that's why the smart protein sector, and very relevant questions, right, for the audience, what the market currently looks like. So you have to know that hamburgers worked well, other snacking formats worked well, like, for example, sausages, etc. That's the kind of innovation we saw in the first many years, first 7-8 years of the industry globally, especially because a lot of that was happening in the US, and people in the US love eating hamburgers. They eat 3-4 hamburgers a week on average. And that's a huge amount of hamburgers, right? But we don't eat that in India. We eat a bunch of other stuff. We eat chicken, we eat mutton, we eat a bunch of seafood, prawns, different curries across states. Andhra chicken curry versus a Kolhapur chicken curry versus a Bihar, mutton curry. All different preparations, a lot of different biryani. Bhairos kind of try to make it more integral through one biryani offering. But basically what I'm trying to get at is we have a lot of national dishes, not one. Keema Pao in Mumbai is a great space to innovate in plant-based meat. At the same time, a Shami Kebab or a Galati Kebab in Delhi is also a great place to innovate. And all of these people are going to need food technologists to make these products, and also marry, culinary applications with the tech forward nature that we discussed through the modalities, through the three platforms, that's where food technologists, biotechnologists, microbiologists, a bunch of other people who've understood some of this technology through their education or through their experiences of working in the food industry are very well kind of positioned to contribute to this sector and make a career in this sector. So in the initial years, in 2016, 17, 15, we saw a lot of initial kind of plant-based mock meats. GFI India was not present at the time in India, and we saw a lot of these. You also see a lot of jackfruit burgers, a lot of fur meat, mock meat. You hear all these terms, and then you think, how are they different from plant-based meat? What are veggie meats? And that's this media. But you have to think and understand that plant-based meat as a category is quite different. Essentially version one of plant-based meats are mock meats, and we've had those for ages. We've been using jackfruit for ages in our preparations as a substitute for meat, right? Many vegetarians still do that, but that's the thing. These products are for vegetarians or vegans, these mock meats, for meats, because they don't like the taste of meat. And that's why this relatively like soy nuggets 90s version that you can think of when you think of plant-based meat or soy chop, all of that is essentially high vegetarian protein category, which is a distinctly separate category from plant-based meat, eggs and dairy, which are meant for non-vegetarians, right? So that's what we are going towards now. We're seeing a lot of higher fidelity mimics and meat-like textures in these products in the market, like plant-based chicken keema from Blue Dry Foods, plant-based chicken nuggets from Blue Dry Foods. You can go online right now and order them, and they'll taste very, very similar, and then they're constantly improving. And the next 5 years we'll see version 2.5, version 3, and many, many more improvements. So globally now products are at version 3.0. So Impossible Burger or a Beyond Burger, they taste and replicate every different aspect of consuming meat. So we are seeing a lot of this innovation, like from Greenest, Biryani, Good Dot products, which are kind of curry formats, etc., coming out in the market in India as well. And many, many more products are coming soon. And again, like Good Milk and new plant-based dairy startups like Beverly, etc., are doing a lot of functional stuff. Like I said, ingredients are useful to know from a business perspective, from a production perspective, but ultimately a hero category of ingredient is not the goal. The goal here is to replicate the functional properties of dairy. The mouthfeel, the ball bearing effect, the flow, the color, everything like Hunter Lab, all of that will go into making sure that the plant-based milk that you're making, no matter it's from almonds, no matter it's from cauliflower, no matter what it is from, it should actually replicate conventional dairy when you put it in coffee, when you put it in your tea, when the consumer plays with it, like they do in India, right? They should be able to ferment it to make their own curd, etc., etc. So those are the kind of things you want to ultimately get at. So if you think about it, all of the current kind of innovation is happening in a lot of these functionality areas as well. And Starbucks launched Oatly, which was the company that went public recently, like I said, from Sweden in India through their plant-based dairy. There's Epigamia, local grown companies which are now launching coconut milk yogurt, etc. There's been SoFit, soya milk from Hershey's for quite some time, and then again butter, peanut curd, and a bunch of other cheddar and cheeses from Good Milk as well are coming in the market. This is what the landscape currently looks for products in the market. There are many more startups which are currently in pipeline. It's not comprehensive, but these are some of the startups that we've identified as close to market, already having products in the market, etc. So definitely give them a shot and Google them up in your own time as well. There's also a lot of ingredient companies coming. Like we discussed, it's a big white space opportunity, right, for stakeholders who are in the B2B value chain of food industry to kind of make in India for the world in the short term, as the demand is kind of building up in our country as well. There's a lot of opportunity for distribution, etc., etc. Again, the good thing is cold chain, as we all know, as food technology is a big issue in our country, right? And establishing cold chains means a lot of investment, reefer vans, abattoirs, etc., etc. And we are spending quite a bit of money on doing that. But what if we can develop shelf-stable meat, eggs, and dairy products? The supply chain issues would be taken care of as well. So that's also an area of innovation which more, innovators and young students should think about, and researchers should think about. Again, these foods are not. Again, the demand for this is going up quite well in Asia Pacific region overall, but also in India, Philippines, China. India has a huge amount, like because we already consume so much plant-based food, right? And then there are questions like, for example, we've been consuming plant-based foods for so many years, right? Why this is new for India? The thing is, plant proteins are not necessarily super bioavailable, right? Which is why people eat meat, eggs, and dairy. So you have to figure out as food technologists how to make plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy where all the proteins are super bioavailable, they're complete in all the essential amino acids, etc., etc. So those are some goals in front of us. But at the same time, there's a high willingness. 75% of APAC consumers are willing to pay a similar price. Like I said, price, taste of convenience, right? Price the same or less, cost the same or better. So that's the kind of philosophy. If you follow that, you're guaranteed success in this sector. And then currently the innovation is happening in the early adopter stage. So any market, if you've studied, if you've looked this, if you've taken any marketing course, whether it's food or technology product, you know that in any given industry there are innovators, early adopters, the early majority market, the late majority market, and then there are the laggards, who are the last ones to adopt to something new like this. So what happens is currently all of our companies are innovating, and there's this unthinkable pizza from Domino's, which was launched again with plant-based chicken a few months ago. All of them are currently catering to early adopters. Who are these early adopters, right? These are people like you and me. People essentially who are in the age group of 20 to 35, 44, and essentially who spend out money to eat from, cloud kitchens, order outside, eat snacking formats outside in QSRs. They eat a lot of meat per week, right? And these are flexitarians. So these are not necessarily, they can be guilty non-vegetarians as well. In a country like India, I have to go out and eat it. That's also a category of consumers you're targeting, because then plant-based meat is a great solution for them. We need to, I don't know if this slide was carried, but essentially it's not just about price, taste, and convenience. It's the entire gastronomic experience. And you have to replicate a lot of the sensory experiences of eating meat, eggs, and dairy while you're thinking about new product development in this sector, right? So yeah, that's that in terms of the question you asked, Pragat.
Yes. So, Shradul, see, challenges are something that none of us can avoid. So, similarly, alternative protein sector will also have its own challenges. So, now I want you to highlight some of the challenges that are associated with alternative protein sector, especially when we talk about the Indian context.
Yeah, no, very, very important question. I think, everybody should understand challenges and opportunities both equally to kind of understand what they're getting into and what the kind of mission is, what kind of change you're really trying to bring about, what the positive externalities are, negative externalities are. And the good thing is very few negative externalities associated with the sector, right? We saw all the negative externalities, and negative externalities means all the negative impact you can have on the entire society, the environment, everything else involved through a specific theory of change. Our theory of change is alternative proteins, smart proteins, and price, taste, and convenience. And essentially, animal agriculture counteracts that because you have to use animals. So the thing is, there's a lot of inefficiencies, but it's huge. So obviously, that's the only way. There's firstly, it's a completely new sector, right? There are essentially no specific a lot of companies to take as inspiration from. Now there are 3 years ago there weren't, so like you saw 1100 companies. So now there are a lot of companies to essentially take inspiration from, to understand from, to advance the open access R&D in the industry. A lot of that hasn't happened like it has for a lot of other industries like baking, farming, a bunch of other things. A lot of these things have been growing. All of them feed into alternative proteins, and all of those advances are still valuable here. But as a specific focused field, it has been only 12 years, right? So relatively very new field. It all started in 2010 when Beyond Meat first was the first kind of plant-based meat company. They work with professors who had extrusion expertise, protein extrusion and texturization expertise, and bought some products in the market. And then they kept on, improving their products. And finally, in 2020, they had an IPO. So it's not just like in a year you can start a company, it goes IPO, right? It's a long journey. So it's definitely tech forward. There are quite a few challenges because in a yeah. So in a country like India, essentially smart protein has a few challenges. I'll talk about a mission for smart protein, and through all of these things, I'll also talk about the challenges. Because in such a new sector, all of the challenges are essentially also huge opportunities for people who first move there, first start their businesses, first decide to make a career in the sector. Like I did, I was one of the very few first few ones from the entire country, right, who thought about making a career in the alternative protein or the smart protein segment. And then essentially that's also an advantage for me, though it's also a disadvantage because it's all new. I don't have many mentors, etc., etc. That's just one example, and that's also true for everything else. So like I said, firstly, we don't process a lot of our plants. So 90, in fact, very small fraction of the entire protein market is plant-based proteins. Almost 95% of that 5% is soy, right? Because all the isolates and concentrates that are needed to make plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy are all largely from soy in our country. We are not making isolates, concentrates, and ingredients for the plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy industry. Like I said, nobody's making that mung bean for Just Egg and supplying it. Nobody's making chickpea isolates. Nobody's making yellow pea. Very, very few players. So that's a big challenge for entrepreneurs to establish the ingredients value chain. That's a big opportunity as well, because if you do that, then you're the first mover, and you can also start exporting globally to all of these companies, Southeast Asia, North America, Europe, and at the same time cater to the local uh, all of these innovation landscape, all of the companies you saw earlier in terms of their R&D efforts as well. So it's an advantage, disadvantage both, and that's why it's a key pillar of our mission for smart protein, right? And then again, we don't have a lot of land grant universities, Cornell, UC Davis, a bunch of these universities existed for hundreds of years. They have essentially been working on food tech, agriculture, and our food processing sector in itself just processes 5% of our fresh produce, right? 5-7%. That's minuscule compared to 70-80% and the kind of infrastructure growth that comes in a country like USA, Canada, etc., European countries like Netherlands, etc., etc. So we have to think about that as well, that we don't have extruders in our country. Then how are we going to innovate and texturize these plant proteins? Very few, right? Even at universities, most extruders are not working. In terms of cultivated meat, I think we have a lot of existing interest in the sector, because we are the largest manufacturers of vaccines. We have a lot of R&D in for example, biopharma and other industrial fermentation and additive manufacturing areas, which is why manufacturing futures initiative and establishing center of excellences at all these universities, IITs, CFTRI, NIFTM, which is what we're actively doing, a center of excellence for cellular agriculture, which is cultivated meat, at Institute of Chemical Technology Mumbai is one of our projects. We work with the Cellular and Center for Molecular Biology in Hyderabad for mutton cell line research, and one of the largest grants ever made in cultivated meat a couple of years ago was in India. So, not that Indian government is also not being proactive about this. They are, for a fact. So that's why all of these things are disadvantages, that we don't have all of that currently. But there's an opportunity here. Like, think about it. We are installing a lot of mega food parks, we are installing a lot of processing capacity, and we keep talking about value addition. This is an excellent sector for value addition, in food processing. And why reinvent the wheel, right? Why repeat mistakes of the West and go through animal agriculture when we already know that currently per capita consumptions of Indian is relatively less, it's going to boom, and we have perhaps better technologies now to cater to that protein and meat, eggs, and dairy demand in our country. So yeah, that's that. And then again, learning from different countries. Again, there's not a lot of expertise, not a lot of technical consultants, not a lot of food technologists, not a lot of policy makers. It's a sector, entire sector being created, and we just don't have enough experts in the alternative protein space in our country. That's why research labs, technology transfer, expert seminars, roundtables across these countries like US, Japan, Canada, Israel, Singapore is going to bring a lot of that knowledge and know-how to India as well through our mission for smart protein. So these were some advantages that I wanted to talk to you through our mission for smart protein in terms of what we are doing to solve these disadvantages or challenges, and how we're kind of bridging for all of that. And then we have established, right, there's no community. If you go very, like, Food Technoist is a community of sorts, right? People come together for webinars, they interact with each other, they share their expertise. Similarly, we have established the largest alternative protein or the smart protein community in India, which is JF Ideas India, the smart protein innovation community. And multiple people come here, attend sessions, network with each other, hire talent, find co-founders, find investors, find technical consultants, etc., etc. We've created the largest conference, the Smart Protein Summit. Last year, Indra Nui and Josh Tetrick of Eat Just were the keynote speakers, and a bunch of other people from MOFP, FSSAI, last year, Amitabh Kant of Invest India. Essentially, everybody was here in terms of talking about their views of how this sector is so important for sustainability, health, and you can watch all of that on our YouTube handle as well. But what we are again doing is, all of this information is missing, right? People don't know the landscape, they don't have a startup manual. We're making all of these things: state of industry reports, scorecards for restaurants, plant-based protein, manufacturing companies database, students database, talent communities, science-tech communities, entrepreneur communities, etc., etc. We're building all of that simultaneously by creating an ecosystem toolkit for the entire ecosystem. Whether you're a student, technical consultant, manufacturer, or university research group who wants to make all the professors come together and they say, we want to focus on all protein as a research area now, where do we go? JFI helps all of these stakeholders through our resources on regular basis and advisory as well. So that's what we've done and kind of put together on a common platform obviously all of this is free, open access in perpetuity. We are a non-profit company, so we work pro bono on all of these things, and we've created like hundreds of people come to us over the past 3 years. I've consulted, or like our team has consulted almost more than 300 odd startups and corporates and other individuals who want to start a company in this in India. Essentially, all of them have a lot of questions about the legalities, regulatory stuff, value chains, bunch of stuff. All of that is missing, right? As an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to start a food forward, like very tech forward food manufacturing company in India, because all of that information is missing. You cannot Google any of this. You cannot go on B2C, B2B platform and find a lot of this information. So we put all of this insights into a huge document over 100 pages, the India Good Food Startup Manual, which is a great place, again, free for download on our website, available for all of you to kind of engage with this sector and understand how to start a company in this place.
Okay, so now when we briefly know about this sector, so now each one of is very curious to know that how we can be a part of this smart protein sector. Like we as a existing and a future food industry stakeholders, we want to support and contribute to your work and help to build the smart protein sector in India in a way larger aspect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think after attending some of these sessions, people get quite excited, right? And we get hundreds of inquiries of people who are curious about this. You have to realistically think, as a student, as a researcher, do I have skills that I can apply? Am I a biochemist who has protein expertise, who has probably worked on extruders, who have worked in machine design? All of the things that we talked about, and we'll see some more later, are important things to think about before you think about getting into the sector. Whether I have the relevant, necessary vision and understanding of the theory of change, and am I making products for the right target group? Am I understanding the science and technology behind it? Am I really replicating the organoleptic properties? Are all key things. Once you kind of decide on that, all the things that I just said, right? All our resources, our community, our conferences, our websites, everything's open for you. As long as you have that skill to apply in the sector, you're very welcome to join. And I'll let you know a little bit more about our initiatives to accelerate this alternative protein or smart protein ecosystem in India, right? There's the mission of smart protein, which we already talked about. There's the JF Ideas India community, which we talked about, the summit. And let's talk a little bit about the innovation challenge now, which is a very important thing for a lot of students who might be there, as majority of our audience today as well, in food technology, biotechnology, agriculture, engineering, a bunch of other allied disciplines as well, life sciences, etc., and the ecosystem toolkit, which we talked about. So think about this, wherever you're sitting in the audience right now, right? You'll fit in either of these things from a production, upstream, manufacturing, and distribution perspective. You can work in raw materials, ingredients, inputs, whether you're a crop development biologist, you might be agriculture specialist. You can work actually on increasing the protein content of crops and making sure that the crops that we are getting in the fields are actually great fit for plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy applications. All of those genotype, phenotype, functional property parameters are very important to research on. There's also a lot of research in production, scale up, engineering technologies, end products, new product development, then again food marketing, business development, distribution. All of that is also very, very important. And again, if you're an investor, if you're an R&D, you're all kind of fit in different parts of the value chain here as well, and what kind of area you want to fund and invest for a specific entrepreneur, like we saw in the landscape as well. Like I said, the value chain is pretty simple. You get the crops, you optimize those crops so that they're the best fit for making plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. They have a lot of protein content. At the same time, essentially, you optimize for the raw materials. There are many processes, right? Chemical, mechanical processes where you isolate and functionalize these ingredients, cleaner extraction methods, fractionation methods for proteins from plants. What do you do with all the agro waste that is generated out so currently the thing is, with rice, wheat, we have optimized the value chains for these crops for decades, right? So everything that comes out of extraction of different parts of rice or wheat, when they process it, everything's used currently in some industry or the other, right? The end goal here is not to just use it for feed, because then again, it's not very, very useful, right? If you're still feeding it to animals. So you have to think about application of other things like starches, etc., that come out of the other than the protein components of your millets, pulses, etc. So that comes into this sector. Then again, there's a lot of new product development, texture analysis, sensory analysis, mass spectrography, etc., to map the specific flavor components, which will come in the end product for composition and process optimization process. Now, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, food engineers, they can all fit well in some of these areas as well. Like I said, some of the key areas to think about if you're a researcher or a student or an early stage professional is, or even a mature kind of researcher who's working and has expertise in some of these areas is, how can we find the right crops? What can I do with my skills to make sure that this industry has the right crops? How can I make sure that I apply my skills to make sure that the best isolation and functionalization principles are applied for raw materials that are going to be plant based, right? Or fungus based or algae based or, cultivated meat, eggs and dairy based, etc., etc. We can characterize, if you're a computer science engineer, like I said, everybody has an application in this. If you use AI, etc., if you're a statistician, you can work on characterizing a lot of this ingredient data from plant-based proteins and make sure that the rapid prototyping takes place. You're not wasting years on trying. There are just so many crops, right? How are you going to know which crop's going to be the best fit for your new product development exercise? So you kind of optimize for that. There's also, like I said, a lot of scope of innovation and ingredients processing. So job and kind of career opportunities exist across many different areas: academia, in research, teaching, extension. The kind of job I'm doing in non-profit, which is the last, you can work with government. People are going to need progressive regulatory experts who understand the challenges associated to make these three modalities safe, etc., and establish standards for that. And then obviously as an investor, you can be investing in this. As a startup founder, you can be starting companies in this. You can be talent that gets hired early on as core team members of these startups. You can work in many of these bigger companies globally and in India, which are now making plant-based meat, eggs and dairy products as well, and soon we'll be making other products as well in fermentation and cultivated meat, eggs and dairy. So again, no matter which your discipline, I think all of you can find some or the other application across these three verticals. And I've tried to be a little exhaustive here in terms of scientific kind of disciplines: microbiology, data science, synthetic biology, plant physiology, breeding, food science, meat science, dairy science, ag science, molecular biology. You all have a very critical role to play in this sector. But also other people, right? Non-scientific disciplines, whether you're a marketing or communications or sales expert, understanding what I'm talking about today, for example, with you, and explaining it, ultimately leading to your brand strategy, etc., for the startup is also very important. You can do communication, journalism, culinary science, environmental science, all of these, public health, all of the supply chain management. Like I said, the value chains will need to be optimized. So all of you have an application in this sector. It's a building of an entire new sector from scratch, right? In many ways, all across the globe. So many new experts across all disciplines. Even if you're a graphic designer, right? If you know what kind of a consumer research exists and what kind of target consumer cohort exists, you can apply those skills in this and find a good career. Again, like I said initially, why I chose this career and why you should perhaps think about choosing this career is also because you have an opportunity to become a thought leader very early on in your field. Like I have tried to become in some ways by consulting people, by talking to people and doing very exciting things. At the same time, there's also so much positive impact on society, on animals, on planet health, on our health, in so many critical issues, which are going to otherwise cost us trillions of dollars over the next 20 years, right? And then again, it's a cutting edge technology. It's so cool to work with so many of these things. It's intellectually stimulating, and it's an intersection of so many more disciplines as well. So if you like a little bit of diversity in your work and life, I think this is a great career for you. We try to build a lot of this, right? For example, you asked Pragya, how can we get associated? Depends on where you're from, etc., and what kind of skills you're bringing to the table. But ultimately, we are trying to build a lot of information across all universities. Last year, I did a challenge, which will again come towards. But we educate a lot of people by disseminating information. Hundreds and thousands of people. That's our goal here in terms of talent. And then enabling critical research projects at top universities which have the infrastructure to work on these things is also a key goal. And then launching coursework, because as late as 2017, when I graduated from NIFTM, we didn't study about alternative proteins, right? Specifically, nobody still does. But we are currently actively working with universities to educate more people as a formal coursework at universities, which will happen in the next couple of years as well at a lot of places. And then we're already doing it at a lot of other universities in Israel, US, etc. now, and we plan to implement that with few IITs initially and other high priority institutes, and then go to tier 2, tier 3 institutes as well. And then essentially there's also a center of excellences, like we talked about in the Mission for Smart Protein, which is our key focus, to engage and educate talent. We've been doing that with a lot of universities, like I said, and we'll keep doing that with a lot of universities and education institutions. Now coming to the main part, right, of the presentation, I know we are running slightly late for questions, but just covering this because it's super important for all of our audience in terms of participating in the sector. We ran last year the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. For early stage professionals, last year the age limit was 28. This time we're thinking we are going to increase it quite a bit for including some mature and entrepreneurs from existing food industry as well into the challenge. And we are also going to, last time it was just plant-based meat, eggs and dairy and seafood, right? This time it's going to be fermentation and cultivated meat, eggs and dairy, seafood as well. So it's going to be much larger. It's going to be a 5-6 month journey like last time. You'll get certificate, you'll get educated in the world's first smart protein digital lab that we have created. You'll part and match make with different teams. You'll work on very interesting cash prize related RFPs and problem statements and proposals and your own startup ideas as well. And then essentially you attend a lot of inspiration webinars, mentoring sessions, and ultimately you go into a demo day. So last year also 10 teams came to the demo day, pitched in front of a bunch of investors, and a lot of them are doing quite well, successful in a lot of global cohorts of accelerators, incubators as well. So this journey we are planning to launch again this year. The dates are not yet finalized, but somewhere around August, September. Stay tuned for it. We'll have more updates soon. And like I always love saying, get smart about smart protein. It's already a smart protein sector. Why not get ahead of the curve and make yourself future ready in terms of the opportunities it can have and participate in an exciting challenge. All of it's obviously largely free. All of our work is, non-profit. So the participating challenge last year was free, and we're hoping to keep it free this year as well. All of this is again possible because of our donors and our challenge partners and sponsors, etc., etc. So we look forward to bringing you more details through Food Techno Ace to your community as well. So stay tuned. And you can go through a student resource guide. Pragya and the Food Technos team will kind of attach some of these links in the description, or they can send it to you later. I've already shared them with them. But basically a lot of guides, entire guides for you to understand how to go on about this sector as a student, right? What opportunities for research, what scholarships, etc., etc. We have all protein projects across universities in the US, right? UC Berkeley, UC Davis, all of these students, people like you who are young, who want to do something good for the society through food technology, have come together to kind of create exciting business plans, research projects, find investors, find speakers, etc., etc. And we are planning to replicate the Smart Protein project, like the Smart Protein chapter project, across few universities in India in 2022 as well. So stay tuned for that as well. And then pioneers of, so by the way, for the challenge we are going to need a few ambassadors as well across few universities for outreach help, for getting more people involved in this challenge, and we'll reach out to you for that as well. Again, if you're a researcher, you can go through Pioneers of Science series on our website and kind of understand all the key researchers in this space, understand all the funding opportunities that we have. We do $4 million globally. Last year we did in terms of open access funding for this sector, where universities across the world submitted very interesting proposals. Some of them were from India as well, but we still haven't seen very strong proposals coming from India. So that's also a great opportunity going forward. Yeah, having said that, I come to an end of my presentation, Pragya.
Yeah, thank you, Shardul, for this webinar. I mean, I really want to thank you for delivering such an informative and interesting webinar.